So, when you are trying to trade somebody, it is a value game. They will bring up values. No matter who you try to trade, they will be like, I do not want to get scammed because of that one bozo that made that how to trade people. And he's like, play dumb, do all this stupid stuff to scam other people, which made everybody in the community really worried about losing a trade instead of what trading's actually about, which is getting the units you want. It's a helpful guide, and so is this. But the thing is people use it as a Bible, but then pick and choose when they want to use it accordingly, and it's very malicious. You could say that is like a trade game thing, but the reality is this. If you look at a unit like Ghetto Shiny and Madoka Shiny being a difference of 10, but they're a reroll apart, what will happen is they will say that you have to add a unit of 10 to equal Ghetto. If you were trading your Madoka for their Ghetto, they would say this is not even, you need to make up the 10 value that I'd be losing, right? Right, and there's also people that will add in the cosmetics cooler or whatever stupid bullshit. But what will mainly come up when you're trading is they'll say your demand is lower. So like in these cases, you'll mostly see 4s and 3s, but in extreme cases, you'll see the 7 with Hamoru right now, which is a really hot topic, and then Kimimaru in Ippo, which is at a value of 2. The reason why I bring up these two is because they are 10 value apart, but Madoka has more of a global demand. So by global demand, it will be like a situation where people will arbitrarily say that the unit is worth less. So if you were trading Madoka for Ghetto, it would be even by their standpoint. But if you were trading them, they would say, no, I'm losing. Despite Madoka's demand being higher, they would lean on the value of the unit and say you have to give them an additional unit to make up for it. Or more than likely, they wouldn't take the trade and trade up further. So they would want Shiny Ghetto for something like, there's no 2s up. Oh, I guess they would say Juzo. And despite it being 800, it'd be like it has a value of 2, so it's worth a Ghetto and like maybe a throwaway unit like a Don Flamingo or something. The problem with them doing this is they're a reroll apart on the official tier list. So if they actually are a reroll apart, demand has little difference as to how valuable a unit actually is. Because if it's 3 to 4 on global, then what does 3 to 2 actually change? So the trade that I got more recently was a 275 Kisame, which is that's his value, 275 down here, which is 2 demand with 20 rerolls, and they offered a Heathcliff and a Yamamoto, which is like to them they were like, that's 240, but Kisame is low on demand, while Heathcliff and Yamamoto are probably close to the 3s and 4s. So they'll be like, it's like a 35L for Kisame because of his low global demand. But then when you get to the higher things, it's a fact that it's a 1 reroll difference, and they're an entire tier above certain other units. So if demand has any say in the matter, it can't be more than 10. Like, it just can't be, because a reroll is like a whole extra $1. So it can't be more than that. And then even if it was, then Ghetto, because of his demand, would be also 450 instead of 460. And then the real muddy thing about it, guys, is when you add like base stats. They have a stat section in here, but it's only for triple S. So what will happen is you'll get into a situation where it's like, these are just for stats, but these stats are only valuable on key units, like Hamoru, like any unit that's still in the metagame, like when Gilgamesh transfers over, right? Any other unit with like higher stats, like regular S, they'll throw that in. They'll be like, it's an S Don Flamingo, and it's just like, according to the trade market, that changes nothing. But they'll put it into the trade and say that dictates a better offer. The reason why this is important is because it becomes everybody doing owner's choice, which is the Dio thing. Dio's demand's only 4. Or how about Toby? Toby's shiny is a demand of 2, but he has 3,550 value. So this guide is literally saying demand is just how many people are looking for it. But people will literally say that removes value from the unit, despite the list saying otherwise. So they'll just do state of fact with every base value and screw people out of trades. And then when you try to flip it on them and go, okay, you're trading me a Don Flamingo for or you're trading me a Boros, right? Because his value is 200. If you try to match them and say something along the lines of, let's go with, I did it earlier, an Izagi, which is 160, and then you give them, let's say you give them a Shisui. So Izagi and Shisui together, despite demands, is 50 and 160. So you would be losing the trade by 10, but they don't want to trade down. It's okay if you did the math wrong. That's my problem, is we don't actually have this list actually needs to be updated for the people that are, because demand is ambiguous. That's like the biggest problem with trade lists, is people will wear the value on the list, but they won't, like, it should be ranges is my proposition. My proposition for the tier list is it should be a range. Like, it would be really annoying for them, but all they'd have to do, and it makes it look way more cluttered, is every unit, depending on stats and demand, they would just need to put a gap. That 220 is for an average Don Flamingo, but they would have to be like a bad one, right? No good stats, any of that. And because of whatever the other thing is, they would have to actually get a calculator for this. They would have to say on the lower end, because of demand and lower stats, it goes down to 200. And then on the higher end, when it's like best demand or better stats, because triple S is a whole extra thing, but then there's units that you don't want to sack a triple S. You don't want to sack a shiny triple S. Like these stats, in addition to their best stats, would be an L to sack, but on these lower end units, it would increase their value. But how much value does it actually increase? So you'd have to be like this particular unit with these stats. But the problem with that is if you're just sacking units for stats, then those units are just this value. Like you ignore whatever value it is. So like if it was damage, instead of the unit being carrot with a value of 5, it wouldn't be 5 plus 455. You wouldn't go to 450. It would be just 445, because that's what you're just using the stats for. You don't add them. It would just be that's what it is. However, you could make the case for certain stat units, like let's go a shiny Homoru with this much value with triple S in every stat. Does that mean that Homoru, let's do, because this is the unit that would benefit the most from that, it's just still a meta unit, would be at 3,725, and then with all the stats in addition, we'll do the 300 into it to 4,000, and then these two together, it's like 800 and 880, so it'd be 4,800, the ultimate like flex. But you could also be like, if you don't care about the shiny on top of it, which is why people would even want a unit like that, you go to Homoru, this one, you would add that 2,000 or so into this Homoru, so that would mean a triple S Homoru would be the value of around a shiny Lulu, because this is a jump of 7,000. It'd be enough for a shiny Lulu, a shiny Jelly. That makes more sense and quite the jump, but I'd actually say the Homoru player's losing. So you'd actually have to say it's even higher, but I don't even think these units would be worth something like that. So it's quite the difference when a unit that actually needs those stats to be increased, right? To have an even crazier jump. If anything, forget the shiny flex. Homoru with triple stats, everything, is way up there. Like, I'm not going to say Dio over Heaven, even though I really want to. Because at the end of the day, some of these units are literally dictated by the cosmetic. So, for instance, Android 21 shiny, or like the Demon Mist Zabuza. People just want the units because it's a very rare cosmetic. There's less than 100 in a game and stuff. Where Homoru has like a bigger fluctuation of how many there are. However, she's very needed for meta stuff. So the problem then comes into play is like, how worth is everything if you don't get this like calculator in ranges? Because like, how much would a character like Don Flamingo that's S damage, A stats be worth? Or do all the values start at C minus? Is it a C minus from the start? And as their stats increase and their global demand, it's a different number and an imaginary number that none of us know. And it's really like, if you get none of these are meta, but if you get a Poseidon that's triple S everything, that's a big deal, right? Because he's a unit that can be used for play. Or if you get any of these other units with very good stats, you don't want to transfer them. They're just trophies. You're just using them for their cosmetic. Like most of these units, like Kuma. If you had a triple S everything in Kuma, it's less worth to someone like me than Roger with triple S everything. Because if you get Roger with a good trait and all that, it'd be way more worth than a Kuma. But there's no indication of it. So that means that any unit, despite, like, as far as we are right now, Roger with triple S every stat and everything, stable, he's demand 5, even though Don Flamingo 50 more above him. If you got triple S everything on shiny Don Flamingo, it would be more worth than a Roger. And I think we all know that's not true. I think in all of us in our hearts, if you have a triple S shiny Roger, triple S regular Roger, or a shiny Don Flamingo, you would want the triple S in every stat Roger, because it's more valuable to have it in a unit that you can use for play. So wouldn't it mean that his value is greater? And as far as the list goes and trading with other people, it's not. Roger is 1,300 no matter how you slice it. If it's bad stats, people just go, ew, I don't really want those stats. So it's so ambiguous that you will get into these arguments with people where if you match them in values, they'll be like, the unit is just straight trash. So if we go back to my earlier example with Izagi, where is he at? I think he's a B. If we go back to Izagi, which 160, if I gave you 3 Izagis, it would equal 480. Okay? It would equal 480 value. And we don't even have to have demand in this. So if it's 480 in value, that means I can move up to A tier and look at the 480s. And let's just go to anybody that's a 4. That means 4 regular Izagis would equal a Heathcliff shiny. Or a Yoshino shiny. No matter how you slice it. But nobody takes those offers. Even though they're losing by 5 value. Like, they're winning by 5 value by taking the 3 Izagis. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you combine together lower units to equal higher values. What matters is what the units individually with either cosmetics with value or what they can do to the metagame. Like, for instance, a C tier, like Daki. Where is she? she was a C tier. Where's Daki? She's down here somewhere, right? Oshi is like a meta contentious thing, but you can get her in the banner, so that's a little bit of a bad example. Nami's out. Where's Daki? There she is. Daki is only 65, despite being a unit that would probably get you a higher ranking in this week's tournament. And she's been a tournament unit for quite a while now because of all the rows and her being a bleed unit. But her current value is lower than something like Ice Queen, who hasn't been in the meta since like the Christmas update. Or Jelly, who's never been in the meta. Is it a cosmetic only thing? Because somebody like Poseidon is a really powerful unit, but he's under a unit like Power, where you can just get Shantir. Or another strong unit like Boros. Poseidon's way stronger than Boros, and Boros' cosmetic isn't too much crazier than Poseidon, and you can't say that it's like a demand issue, because it's like, I guess 3 to 5, but that makes Boros go up 100 or 95 difference. 95 difference by 2, but Don Flamingo has less than that. So if we do the math on this, it's like Poseidon's, as far as damage or cosmetic, whatever you want to say, has a lower value of 3, despite being stronger than both of those units. And Don Flamingo only has 1 more, and he's an entire 100 above him. But Boros, that's even weaker than both of them, has a value of 5, but is somehow lower than Don Flamingo. So is it like, what's dictating Don Flamingo to be higher here? Is it because Don Flamingo is slightly stronger? Because his demand for his thing is lower. Or is it the cosmetic? Because the cosmetic has him at a 5. But he's not higher than Kent Shiny or Don Flamingo Shiny. Because if it was a situation where it's a cosmetic diff, something like Shiny Kento, which is harder to get, it says Kent or Shiny Kent, has a lower demand despite only being a cosmetic worth, but it's higher than Boros, but Boros has a higher demand. So it's between the two. Kent has no viability, where Boros has somewhat, a little bit of stay, not too much, but relevant to MK, right? So it would be the cosmetic is more favorable, but it's lower on the list. And if it's a power thing, right? Where is it? Back to Poseidon. Poseidon would be higher on the list, but he's a 7, half of these units. So you would need 2 Poseidons to even equal a Boros or something. So it gets really muddy when you start getting into the A's here, and people are flooding you with upper B tier trades and lower A tier trades to get to the mid tiers, because everybody is just arbitrarily saying their unit is worth more, and says your unit is worth less, to the point where you are always downgrading. And they'll say stuff like, you don't know demand, you don't know a value difference, and if you match them with values, they will say it's an L. If you match them with demands, like if you do everything possible even, they will still say, I don't want the trade, because the units that you're offering them will not meet their expectations despite having more value. So once again, if we bounce back for Madoka, her value is 4 at 450, where Izagi is 160, same demand, but somehow 4 of those doesn't equal a Madoka, because people look at it as a mid B tier unit. But if it's a tier unit situation, then how are people offering lower units for a lower demand A minus, despite it being an A minus tier unit? It would be, if its demand so poor, it doesn't belong in that tier anymore, it would drop, but its value hasn't changed. In fact, if it's on the decline, I don't think they have it anymore. But there you go. If it's declining, like Lulu, this is when it's losing value. So if somebody was trading me, and I wanted to go the demand and trend tier, I would say Lulu is 185 now because it's continuously losing value. So if you give me a Lulu, I know it's going to move down from B tier plus to mid B tier soon. So you would need to trade. I wouldn't be offering anything above it because I know he's going to be worth less in the long term. I knew I would lose eventually. That's why I did that. That's the problem with the current trade market, dude. That's the biggest issue. Yeah, exactly. And it's counterintuitive when they do that. That's the problem with the trade market as of right now, is people tried to Bible up on the thing, but they only use it when it's favorable for their specific trade, which doesn't work for everybody, and it doesn't work for every trade. So really what it comes down to is the list actually works against itself.